Gerald Brett talking to Richard Miles. After 15 years of imprisonment, wrongful conviction, that's easy to say, but 15 years is a long time.
Yeah.
I just finished binge watching The Wire for probably the second or third time.
Right.
And that part where Avon Barksdale says, they're just 2 days in prison, the day you go in and the day you go out.
That's it.
And yet, between that time, you're trying to get out.
Yes, sir.
You're not just trying to do the time. You're trying to get out. You're trying to prove your innocence. What is that process like?
So it was dual. It was a dual purpose going on in my whole situation. I would say when I first got to Cofield, I met a guy named Benjamin Spencer, and everywhere I go, I talk about Ben. Ben is an innocent man in prison. He's been locked up over 30 years. He's a Dallas case. The judge deemed him actually innocent, but Texas is one of the states where the Court of Criminal Appeals must agree with the lower courts, and the Court of Criminal Appeals denied him. And so Ben cut her on Cofield. And when I got there, he was talking to everybody and asked me where was I from. So I told him my case, and he gave me the number to Centurion Ministries, which is an innocence organization in Princeton, New Jersey. And he was like, man, they're an awesome organization. They're working on my case. I've been locked up now 10 years. And I had been locked up 2 at that point in time.
Right.
He said they're working on my case, and I'm getting ready to go home any day now. I wrote them back in 1998. I got a very generic letter back from them, but I still wrote them and wrote numerous other people.
Right.
My mom and dad on the outside met Miss Joyce Ann Brown and started volunteering at her office and trying to get her to look into my case. She started looking a little bit. Unbeknownst to me, she called Jim McCluskey, which is the same organization that I wrote. Right. So the same organization that got me out that's working on Ben's case also got Miss Joyce Ann Brown out. And they loved Miss Joyce Ann Brown. And so when Miss Brown called her, they took a special interest into my case.
And for those who don't know, Joyce Ann Brown was one of the initial, one of the very first people exonerated from prison. She's since passed on.
Yes.
And of course, we're talking, one of the reasons why our conversation is relevant is because of what you've done with the compensation you received.
Yes, sir.
But Joyce never received that compensation.
Correct. Yes, sir. Miss Brown, Linnell Jeter.
Right.
You had quite a few exonerees that got out before they actually enacted the compensation. And because Miss Brown's case was expunged,
rather than exonerated,
that's what kept them from compensating her.
Right.
But to that point, she was still the trailblazer for the movement. I mentored up under her for 2 years before we actually kicked off Miles of Freedom. And so that was a great space to be in.
Right.
But while I was incarcerated with my mom and dad volunteering, me writing letters, I met another guy in the law library. So I filed my writ of habeas corpus 1107 after my direct appeal was denied. And I worked with a guy named Ricky Wyatt, where Ricky Wyatt was innocent as well. Spent over 30 years in prison, and we was on Cofield, and he taught me how to shepherdize cases.
Right.
And he taught me how to look for the Strickland versus Washington, a three-pronged test that you have to try your case on. So I'm meeting other innocent people on Cofield, and that was a bittersweet moment to let me know, hey, you're not in this fight alone.
Exactly. So when you have gotten your case, when your case has gotten attention, and they seize upon, because, and let's be clear, the criminal integrity unit is the unit in Dallas County responsible for examining primarily, at least it used to be, cases where DNA evidence is proving people to be innocent. But yours was not a case of DNA evidence.
Correct.
Yours was a case of prosecutorial misconduct.
Is
that right?
Sir. Yes, sir. So the ultimately in February of 2012, after Centurion did their investigations, they turned it over to the Conviction Integrity Unit, which was then Mike Ware Jenna Parker and Terry Moore, which it was led by the face was District Attorney Craig Watkins.
Right.
When they got my case, and after their investigations, the Court of Criminal Appeals overturned my conviction in February of 2012 for the grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, tainted identification, and faulty scientific evidence. And so if we back into that, these highlight the prosecutorial misconduct was the guy that testified against me signed an affidavit in 2010 stating that the prosecutor told him to point me out in trial. He said that the day of my trial he had my picture with him, and he told him he could not identify me. The prosecutor urged him to testify against me. The prosecutor also, the GSR test, they did a gunshot residue test.
Right.
The lady testified that it was positive in trial. 15 years later, Centurion Ministries hired an investigator to look at that piece of evidence. It was negative. I've never shot a gun in my life.
Right.
I'm 44 now. So she signed an affidavit stating that if given an opportunity, she would not testify in the same manner. Right. So the two pieces of evidence that convicted me were both fabricated up under the guidance of the prosecutor. The tainted identification was the procedures that the police took. When they arrested me, they should have took me straight to homicide, but they took me to the place of the shooting.
Right.
The one witness that testified was the only witness behind the Texaco. The other 9 witnesses was in front of the Texaco, so they never saw me in handcuffs. They then took all of the witnesses to homicide. He's the only person that pointed me out.
Right.
Not because they saw me do a shooting, but because they saw me in handcuffs with the police.
So and you look guilty when you say
I look guilty.
Right.
And so the prosecutorial, which was the witnesses, the tainted identification, and then the faulty scientific evidence, once again, was that GSR test.
Right.
So you take all of them out of my case, it was no reason to even arrest me.
So, and let's be clear that it's that the tragedy of these wrongful convictions is not just that they arrest, prosecute, and imprison the wrong person.
Right.
It's also that the guilty party
go free
is still out there.
Yeah. And even worse than that, I remember the night when I got out, me and my mom were at home and we're excited, but I'm watching the news and the prosecutor is talking to the victim's mother. And so now when you have a sword that's being just reopened by the criminal justice system because you told me that we had closure 15, 16 years ago.
Exactly.
And now you're telling me we don't. And so he's telling her we got the right person. And so at that moment, I knew for the rest of my life, I'm going to always be proving myself innocent.
Exactly.
Even after the system has deemed me actually innocent.
And the prosecutors are loath to admit that they've made a mistake.
Yeah. And I understand how in the process that we are human and we fall short. If prosecutors would at least say, man, you know what, we got it wrong, that would at least help. We're not telling you to jump across the bridge. Just admit that you was wrong. That's healing in itself, and that's not happening.
So now you're released.
Yeah.
What's that day like?
Oh man, that's exactly what it was. And so I was released in October of 2009 after spending a total of 15 years in prison. My dad had passed 6 months before I got out. And so it was very overwhelming to come back home, but not be fully exonerated.
Right.
And so being released but not free was my mindset because I knew I still had a lot to fight for.
Right.
And so coming home, being a convicted felon of murder and attempted murder, it was very limited jobs that I could get.
Right.
I couldn't get couldn't get an apartment because of the type of conviction. So I'm carrying around these newspaper clippings to try to persuade people to hire me and give me a chance.
Right.
And so people had to step up and be a liaisons for me with getting a place to stay, with getting my first jobs, and this is the things that happen. But even with that, just being isolated from society, being able to talk to people, being able to talk to women, it's a very mentally draining process because I was 34 years old in age-wise, but I was really 19
from
society.
Right.
I didn't know nothing about taxes, and I was scared. I was literally scared and overwhelmed with the responsibilities that a man is supposed to have and to be able to articulate.
Gerald Britt, Vice President of External Affairs with CitySquare. We're talking with Richard Miles, who is the founder and the executive director of Miles of Freedom. We're going to get to Miles of Freedom and that work in just a minute. But as you know, Kevin Turner, who is one of the exonerees, he was, I think his crime was sexual assault.
Yes.
And he told me at one time that he had that everything, and this is prior to the compensation being increased. Everything that is out there for prison reentry, this prison reentry population, are for people who had been found guilty.
Right.
There's nothing out there for people who have been exonerated, and so that's a second burden.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because if you're sitting in a class, or you are going out for a job, or you're talking to a caseworker or anything like that, they're used to dealing with people who have been paroled.
Right.
They're not used to dealing with people who've been exonerated.
Yeah, that's a great situation to talk about, because when you come out of prison, basically a person that's innocent, we're tired of being looked at as if we're guilty.
Right.
And so while I was in prison, you couldn't help but to perceive me as being guilty, because I'm in the population of everybody that's guilty predominantly. Right. But when I fought and won my freedom, I don't really want to be associated in that same context.
Exactly.
And so I don't want to have to sit in a parole office with a person that's actually committed a crime. I need to have that disconnect, you know. And so that was one of the things that was very hard for the exonerees to kind of transition to, is when you come from TDC, now you're still dealing with TDC.
You know, it's interesting too, because I would say, because exonerees, at least 19 of them met at CitySquare when we were over off of Haskell, and they would meet there for the groups, and I'd stay there and talk with them and meet with them as well. And I was wondering, you know, how long it's going to be before they get tired of being called exonerees.
Yeah.
You know,
and you know, that's like with me, everything is a next step. I did not want to stop at exoneree, because exoneree is too close to ex-convict.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
It's too close to. I think we're in love with labeling.
Yeah.
You know, if we can't label it, we don't really want to associate or connect with it. I gotta put a label on it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
And so that label was given to us, and it's up to us to either hold on to it or try to create something else out of that situation.